This is about restorative justice to try to have those black leaders, those civil rights activists who were wrongfully convicted over 50 years ago, to have them exonerated.
After Ray's passing, I found a confession letter that Ray had written and mailed to my father back in 2011. This letter details the FBI, and the NYPD's involvement in the assassination of Malcolm X, and how he was forced to betray his people. This letter helps me to understand the pain and guilt that Ray felt for the last 55 years.
All right, guys, so this is an interesting editorial that I have for you this morning. And since it's February, Black History Month, I thought it'd be a very interesting one to give you. And, going through it, it's just interesting how 57, 56 years ago, what was happening then is kind of still happening today. Like nothing's changed in 56, 57 years, which you're going to see here this morning. Tomorrow, I'm going to give you an editorial about a security guard that shot a man in the face. Why? We'll find out tomorrow why he did that. And that security guard is in more than just hot water. So I'm going to give you that tomorrow. But today we're going to talk about this one that goes back about 56, 57 years. But something they just found out this year about it. What am I talking about? All right, y'all, so you know who Malcolm X was, right? Malcolm Young, Malcolm Little, not Malcolm Young. Malcolm Young wasn't he a AC/DC? Malcolm Little was an activist, for those youngins who don't know, and changed his name to Malcolm X. And he was a member of the, he was an Islamic activist group. I can't even think now. Just Google Spike Lee, Malcolm X. It'll tell you everything you need to know. Anyway, let me get to the story and let's find out what's going on and what happened back then that's kind of happening today. Thank you to NBCnews.com for the story. Members of Malcolm X's family have made public what they described as a letter written by a deceased police officer stating that the New York Police Department and FBI were behind the 1965 killing of the famed black activist and civil rights advocate. Malcolm X was a powerful orator who rose to prominence as the national spokesman of the Nation of Islam, an African-American Muslim group that espoused black separatism. He spent more than a decade with the group before becoming disillusioned and publicly breaking with it in 1964. He moderated some of his earlier views on the benefits of racial separation. He was killed at New York's Audubon Ballroom while preparing to deliver a speech. 3 members of the Nation of Islam were convicted in the shooting. A letter released at a news conference on this Saturday, was attributed to a former undercover NYPD officer named Raymond Wood. His cousin, Reggie Wood, joined some of Malcolm X's daughters at the news conference at the site where the Audubon Ballroom once stood to make the letter public. Raymond Wood's letter stated that he had been pressured by his NYPD supervisors to lure 2 members of Malcolm X's security detail into committing crimes that resulted in their arrest just days before the fatal shooting. Those arrests kept the 2 men from managing the door security at the ballroom and was part of a conspiracy between the NYPD and the FBI to have Malcolm X killed, according to the letter. Wood's letter reads, "Under the direction of my handlers, I was told to encourage leaders and members of the civil rights groups to commit felonious acts. Some historians and scholars have contended that the wrong men were convicted. The Office of Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance last year said it would review the convictions in the case. Following this past Saturday's news conference, Vance's office released a statement saying its review of this matter is active and ongoing. The NYPD said in a separate statement it has provided all available records relevant to that case to the district attorney and remains committed to assist with that review in any way.
Believe that, don't you, Danny, that I'm here to help you in any way I can?
The FBI declined to comment on the matter.
Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? I'm looking for some information.
I ain't got nothing to say to you, sir.
Malcolm X's daughter, Ilyasa Shabazz, said she had always lived with uncertainty around the circumstances of her father's death. She told the news conference,
"Any evidence that provides greater insight into the truth behind that terrible tragedy should be thoroughly investigated."
and she's right. I mean, if the wrong men were convicted of that murder, then her father's killers are still out there living free and enjoying life. And if they happen to be associated with or be law enforcement officers, that's injustice at its greatest level. So she's right. It should be thoroughly investigated. They should try to find out the truth behind it, if the right men were convicted or if they convicted innocent men, which has happened so many times, especially back then. How many people are being released from prison in the last several years that had spent 20, 25 years in prison? Many of those are people of color. So if you were a black man back then, you pretty much got wrongly convicted, and the cops would lie and say, yeah, he's the one that did it. And they were lying their butts off. Well, guess what? 20 or 30 years later, nothing's changed. So it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting to me how just all these law enforcement higher-ups, these management people and these politicians and these legislators are talking about, we're changing police policy. We're making police policy different. We're improving law enforcement agencies across the nation, and nothing's changed. What happened 50, 60 years ago is still occurring today. You see what I'm saying? Ronald Reese, Plano, Texas, make sure I say it right. Plano, Texas, Ronald Reese, young black 18-year-old just walking home from work. Somebody calls and says, there's a black male walking home in the snow with no jacket or whatever they said. And I get the cops going out there. No, I get that. It could have been an elderly man who was disoriented or a drunk person who just got lost in the snow. I get going out there. But when the guy says, I'm fine, I'm just walking home from work, I'm straight. Okay, bye. Well, she did say you're walking in the roadway. He says, my bad, sorry. Okay, that's okay. Just, don't slip and fall. Have a good night. And then drive off. That's what they should have done. Instead, they arrest him. Why? Because there's a black guy walking around in the middle of the snow at night with no jacket on. Maybe he doesn't get cold. He said he does that every night. People in New York, I've heard walk around in shorts, flip-flops, and, thin sweatshirts in the middle of the snow. Why? Because they're used to that. They're acclimated, they call it. But I digress. Kind of got in the weeds there a little, but not really. Because the police are still not able to live with truth. Today, 1964-65, this guy's letter states, I was told to basically tell these guys to commit felonies. They were security for Malcolm X, and if they committed felonies and they were arrested, Malcolm X would not have those security guys by the door. That would leave that door unsecure. Boom, those guys come in and they kill him. It's kind of how it sums up. Community Leo Watch, watching law enforcement officers, that's to include those from 57 years ago and from coast to coast.